This is going to be a short video. It's come to my attention recently that the version of Jesus I've been teaching is not actually the real one. Like all of you, I'm someone who's grown up in a very difficult time as far as the prevailing thoughts and doctrines on earth. I actually went to a Christian school when I was younger, and so I have that as one of my influences. Also the atheism that is also prevalent in our society. And then I have a bunch of other influences as well, like everyone else on earth does. Trying to make sense of it all is very hard to do. But ultimately what I've realized recently is that the doctrine I've been teaching is not really the true doctrine. Because although Christ told us to repent of our sins, He didn't teach us to be so hard on ourselves and so self-critical. In my series for men that I just made last month, I was extremely self-critical, thinking to myself that eventually I'll feel like I'm found, so to speak. That eventually, if I keep criticizing myself, eventually I'll be able to stop. That if I keep up at it, that eventually I'll be good enough. If I learn how to do this thing right, or if I do this thing right, or the other thing right, or this or that and the other, or whatever the heck I could have thought of, and if I do that, then I'm good enough. Then I'll be good enough. Or if other people do this or that or the other, then they'll be good enough. And what I've realized is that all of that is complete nonsense, because Christ didn't teach that. That's why a couple days ago I really had to pray to God, and I told God my thoughts. I was extremely sad because all I could think of is how I'm not good enough. And then my ego was telling me, but you're not alone. Because I've been trying to learn how to be a man. Because being a man is more than having a penis. It's walking and talking and thinking and acting a certain way. But even that's nonsense. I'll explain what I mean in a little bit, but it was what the majority of my series for men was about. And I've realized how wrong the angle I was coming from is. Because, for one, Christ came to forgive us our sins, and He didn't come to make us extremely self-critical. There's multiple ways to whip or beat oneself up. There used to be Christian monks who would literally do that with whips and brittles and chains and literally strike themselves on the back as self-punishment, thinking that it brought themselves closer to God. But what I've realized is that my series for men is actually what I was teaching, to whip and beat ourselves up mentally. I've really learned a lot. A couple days ago I looked up ego is Satan. I was listening to Stoic teachings. I'm trying to relearn the right way of thinking about everything. I started off by listening to Stoic teachings, how to not be affected by negative situations or if you feel let down, and then I got into learning about the ego, and then I got into learning about Buddhism, and then I got into learning about Christ again from a whole new angle. Buddhism, Taoism, Stoicism, and Christianity all combined. And I'm starting to realize that the truth actually is that Christ wants us to accept ourselves. It sounds so strange, because a couple days ago I felt like I'm not, because my whole series for men was about me trying to learn how to be a man that I approve of, trying to learn to be a leader, trying to learn to feel good enough. Because for the past 10 years I felt very depressed. Literally would eat the same meal every single meal of the day, let alone every day. Didn't even feel like living. And I had to get to the bottom of why I felt that way, and what it really was is feeling like I have no place on the earth. Because my other complaint was not only am I not good enough, not only am I not good enough to lead other people, but the other people aren't good enough for me to lead them. Those were my thoughts 3 or 4 days ago. I don't feel like that at all anymore. The past couple days I've been shown, in fact, every single person I've met in the past 3 or 4 days is extremely worthy of being led and leading themselves. They are worth my time, every single one of them. And I feel full of purpose at last, again. Because the deepest thing is, and I've heard this from these other so-called trains of thoughts like Buddhism, different trains of thought, so to speak, and I always rejected them because of the source. I'm like, oh, it's Buddhism, must be a deception. It's simple as a day's old, as Ricard says. In other words, I was wrong. Things like the way you treat other people is actually the way you treat yourself, and vice versa. And I realized that's actually what Christ was teaching. Because when he tells us to forgive one another, otherwise we won't be forgiven, it's actually something that has to deal with forgiving ourselves, right here and now. Because his whole ministry was about us being forgiven. See, my whole series for men was about me feeling good enough, or at least trying to one day, and I utterly failed. Because the true message that I should have been teaching, but I didn't know yet, is that none of us are good enough. But actually we are. We're all good enough, because Christ says so. God says so. God made us who we are. Now that's not an excuse to deal with our beast-like nature and not strive for divinity. But it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about accepting ourselves and being thankful that we even have any sanity at all in this crazy world. Christ's message was a message of hope, not self-critique and ridicule. Because I hadn't even realized it, but when I said those prayers, that was literally my words 3 days ago, is God, I'm not good enough to lead people. And they're not good enough to lead. So what do? What's the whole point? Never mind them, like I'm not even good enough. Forget their faults. I have too many faults of my own. Those are my thoughts. And I didn't even realize that that's from psychology that I've just discovered recently, is that if I feel that way about myself, I'll feel the same way about everyone else. It's why people who are angry with themselves are angry at everyone else. People who are this or that with themselves are the same way with everyone else. It's what Christ said. Out of the heart of a man does he speak. Which isn't just speaking about a man's words, but his whole life. Something I realize is that everyone on earth is actually honest with themselves. In other words, the way that we judge ourselves and the standard that we hold ourselves to and how we treat ourselves is literally how we will treat others and the standards we will hold them to, so to speak. So someone that doesn't forgive themselves won't forgive other people, and someone that's angry with themselves won't forgive other people or be angry with them, and someone that doesn't think that they're good enough won't think anyone else is good enough. And someone that's full of love will be full of love for everyone else. And someone that is sad will see sadness in others, but someone that's happy will see happiness in others. Stuff like that. Because the truth is, scientifically speaking now, our brain is just electrical signals. Nothing is actually really real. Everything we perceive is just a signal sent to our brain. The physical realm was created. The physical world is just space-time reality, which is a creation, a construct, if you will. It literally tells you in the Bible that it's literally held together through frequency, like a mirage, and it's held together through Christ's frequency. In other words, it all comes out of him. And interestingly, Christ is a human being, or at least he was, and that's what we are too. And the phrase Son of Man is actually a high praise, because human beings are very high-level creatures in God's eyes, or at least we used to be. Until we decided that we weren't. See, Adam ran from God. God didn't run from Adam. Adam told himself he had to run and hide. God never told him that. Adam told himself he was naked and should be shameful about it. God never told him that. When it comes down to this life, the whole thing is like a chance to choose the good over evil. And to work on our own tests and struggles, whatever we struggle with, and ultimately to forgive ourselves and others. That's literally what the whole Bible is about, and it's the message that Christ came to teach us. And when it comes to the statement I made 2 minutes ago that everyone's honest with themselves, what I mean is all of us people, we hold ourselves to whatever standard it is that we hold ourselves to. And usually we're all way too hard on ourselves. And whatever standard that is, or another word for it would be emotion or view or vantage point or perspective, whatever of those perspectives we have regarding ourselves is the same way we'll view everything else. I used to hear that type of message before, and I thought, that doesn't make sense. That sounds like some Buddhism nonsense. But if you really think about it psychologically, it makes perfect sense. And I've seen the proof of it. Because again, it's just electrical signals. And even something I mentioned in one of my videos is that it's good to be seen by other people. In fact, one of the main ways we get to know ourselves is by experiencing ourselves through other people. And that's why literally, if you want to feel good, you have to treat others good. It literally is like you're treating yourself good when you treat other people good, because we're all literally one, based on math and science. I've heard that message before many times, and I always thought that sounds like baloney and nonsense, but it's actually fully true. It makes perfect sense based on science and psychology and physiology of the human mind. It's all connected. Something else that I realized about Christ, in Matthew 12:50, he tells his audience that his brothers and sisters are those that keep his commandments. But elsewhere he tells people to treat everyone like their neighbor. And when a guy asked Christ in the book of Luke, "Who's my neighbor?" Christ said that your neighbor, you should treat everyone well. He explained, basically. And what I've been teaching for years is that Christ only treated people well if they kept God's commandments. But that doesn't add up, actually. Because Christ came to be a friend to sinners, he explained. That's who he literally came to teach and show love to. What I've been teaching is that people who don't believe the exact same thing, they don't deserve kindness and love. We're above them. And I just realized recently that that's actually Pharisee doctrine. It's completely evil. And when it comes to people's flaws or their weaknesses or addictions, like some people like smoking weed, for example. Someone today that I was with asked me if I smoke weed, and I told him I stopped, and he said, "Why?" He said, and I had to think about what to say, because I knew like I shouldn't preach, that would offend him. I said, because it was no longer good for me. And even that answer offended him, because weed is good for him, or so he thinks. He feels like he needs it at this moment. So that's all I said, and that's all he said, and I felt bad for him, because that's actually why Christ came, is to show us an easier way. And when I said 3 times already that we're all honest with ourselves, the standard we hold others to is the same standard we hold ourselves to, and vice versa. So the thing about our ego is that pretty much we're all really hurt inside. Because when we were young, we didn't even have an ego. The word ego, it means our self-perception. And up until around the age of 5, we didn't even have that. But from like the age of 5 till like 8 or 9, we did have, or we began to have a self-perception. And it was probably pretty pure and innocent and unscarred. There wasn't much pain there. But from around that age onwards, the life starts to scar us. The classmates might make fun of us or ridicule us, or our parents might beat us, or we might lose our parents, or friends might betray us, or we might have a horrible situation in our life, or have to change countries or schools, or lose our grandmothers or our mothers or fathers, or whatever it is you can think of, and we start to get hurt by this world. And what Christ was teaching is that we need to come to him because his yoke is light and his burden is easy. What he's really saying is, let it all go. You don't need to build up this ego anymore, because what the ego has become for all of us that are older than 10 years old, I would wage, is a type of defense mechanism. Because the truth is, and here's the deepest thing I've learned maybe, I've even learned that I shouldn't even teach much, and if and when I do, I shouldn't even use the words I or you, because there really is no such thing as I or you. I'll be learning more about that soon. I'll figure out how to teach it sometime too. But the thing about it is, there's only one part of us. It's called the ego, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but it splits into two once we start ignoring it. So most of us adults, we have two parts in ourself. And I'm not talking about the divine aspect and the animal aspect, I'm talking about the ignored and the ignorer. All of us, I would wage, started to ignore ourselves somewhere along this life. Started to ignore our pain. Started to ignore our fears. Started to ignore our insecurities. That's what I was learning about Buddhism recently. And it's not all evil or false what they teach. In fact, I would say that nothing they teach is wrong, except for the doctrine of reincarnation, as far as I can tell. Because what they teach is that these thoughts and feelings we have, they're not really ours. And they're like the waves of the sea. They come and go. And what we should do is acknowledge them as observers and not hide from them or lie to them. And a lot of it also is actually our so-called inner child that wants attention and to not be ignored anymore. But this world teaches us to ignore it. So it splits into two. Speaking of our internal, we start ignoring ourselves. So now there's the ignored, our true self that we ignore, and then there's the ignorer, our fake, falsely egotistical self that this world tries to build up all of our lives. We've all been lied to. And ultimately what I've learned is we need to be way less critical about ourselves, not more. I had it all wrong. Finally, the last thing I'd like to talk about is when it comes to religion and even the knowledge of the Bible, which isn't a religion, as I talk about sometimes. All of you probably know that fact. The fact that the Bible and religion aren't the same thing. But even when it comes to having knowledge of what the Bible actually says, it's very dangerous, because it gets us to start to look down on people, or even to compare ourselves to people who don't have the same knowledge. But that's not the message of the Bible at all. And that's something else I've realized is really bad, because for so long now, and I want to say two more things, actually, but for so long now, I've excluded everyone on earth if they didn't believe almost everything, or better yet, everything that I believe. I must exclude them. I can't have any dealings with them. They're evil. They're this, they're that, they're the other. But what I've found out is that that's completely false. Something else I want to mention before I end this video is something I've struggled with from the Bible, and I always thought it was a good thing, but I've just realized it's not, is that for me, the Bible, because I grew up in this Christian school, right, and I went to these Christian churches, and I've seen how they teach this fake modern Christianity, and even it has some good in it, but ultimately what they're teaching is a lot of lies, teaching people that it's good to sin, basically. That's not true at all. But my point, I'm trying to make the point here. My point is that I've used the Bible to be even more critical of myself than humanly imaginable, than I had even ever been before. And that's actually not even the message of the Bible either. And because I've been that way with myself, I've been that way with everyone else. So I've lost opportunities to enjoy probably millions of people's friendship by this time. Because since I've let that boundary and that wall and that shell or defense, since I let those lies go, I've actually enjoyed many people's presence, and I've seen God in many people. I finally am starting to see Him in myself, and because I'm seeing God in myself, now I'm seeing God in everyone else and everything else. And that's the true message of the Bible. The message of the Bible is not what I've been teaching, or even what maybe anyone's really teaching these days. It's almost like a secret. There's a lot more I could teach on this. I do have a lot more to learn about it as well. But that's all I have to say for now. It's important for us to be kind to one another, and also ourselves. This is what Christ would have us say. Peace be upon all of you.